Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com, here with an Arcanist PvE healer. It is quite different, but might be the most powerful healer in the Elder Scrolls Online. So I'm going to show you in this video how to use it both in dungeons and trials. Customize a build with tons of flexible gear options. I was very skeptical on the healing on the Arcanist. Took me a long time to kind of figure out actually how to use it and change and a shift in the meta. And a lot of big dogs are using this at in-game trials. And I'm going to show you a sample template of how to do it. Dungeons, trials. You're going to want to pick this up. So if you get something out of this video, like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Let me know what you like about the Arcanist healing and if this helped you. Now let's get to it and show you the Magic Arcanist healer. Okay, the Arcanist healer. We're going to start with the dungeon skills first, because that's what probably most people are going to want to look at. Also, you can skip ahead in the timestamps if you want to come back here or go to trial setup. Now, realize what I'm showing you is going to be different than what I actually used in the footage. Reason why, I found a better way to play this, so keep that in mind. We're going to use a restoration staff on our front bar, which is pretty obvious. All the passives in here really going to amplify and help our resource sustain and healing. The three staples in healing are Radiant Regeneration, which is a strong heal over time. You can apply this before the fight starts, and you want to spam it right before the fight starts, depending on how many group members you have. Next up is Illustrious Healing. This is going to put a heal on the ground that heals over time in an 8-meter radius. Fantastic to place on a tank or your DPS or whoever when you're in a group, plus it has a 28-meter radius. Next up is Combat Prayer. So this is going to spike it down and kind of act as a decent burst heal, but really you're using it for Minor Berserk predominantly. Minor Resolve is also useful. Keeping high uptime on Minor Berserk will essentially make fights a lot easier for you. So these three resto abilities are staples, and you should use them pretty much on every healer build. So next up is Chakram of Dynasty. So I was using the other morph, but this one is amazing. You're basically going to surround 4 allies in front of you, grabbing a nice damage shield. If you recast it on shielded target, it's going to grant a new shield that's 30% stronger. Essentially, you can spam cast this and get huge shields on your target, plus it generates Cruxes. This is a fantastic skill to use. Consider this a way to generate Cruxes. You can either spend or not spend Cruxes depending on how you want to use this build. Now for the dungeon setup, what I like to use is Evolving Rune Mend as kind of a burst heal. It's very expensive, but if you have 3 Cruxes and you maintain it, it's actually a cheap one. The reason I like a burst heal in dungeons is a lot of times people are spread out, especially if you're watching some of this footage. Coral Airy Hard Mode, one of the hardest dungeons in the game. It's really hard to be on top and using Combat Prayer or a non-burst heal when someone just gets chunked. Consider this a flex spot on your bar if you don't need a burst heal or you don't like it, but this will help you similar like a Templar Honor the Dead. There is a delay with this skill because it has 3 heals in a short time. So you got to be pretty reactive when you use this one. Also, you can use Curative Surge. This is kind of like the heal beam, 22 meters, 4 meters wide. Not exactly the widest of the beams. I personally don't like using it because you're really vulnerable. And a lot of times as a healer, you have to spend tons of time refreshing the restoration staff heals over time to really keep your heals really high. But in a doubt, if you need really massive heals per second, this is your go-to. It also consumes Crux, restores magic and stamina per Crux spent to your allies over 4.5 seconds. So it's actually great if people are playing in a group together, tight, locked in, and you need a burst heal. Now, ultimate of choice for dungeons. Absolutely love this one. Glyphic of the Tides. It's going to put down a massive 15-meter radius, 15-second duration, 200 ultimate. And as you start healing it, it basically soaks it up, and when the cap is reached, you're going to get major protection, reducing damage by 10%. This is fantastic in those hard mode dungeon fights where everyone just seems to die. It reduces damage like crazy. The healing per second is just out of this world. In fact, a lot of these hard modes, I'd have a DPS run one of these if we had another Arcanist, because it just carries your survivability from such a wide radius and such a long duration, only at 200 ultimate cost. Another good alternative is this Gibbering Shelter, did I say right? 180 ult, 10-second duration, but an absolute god tier massive shield that you can use. Another defensive that you can run is Reviving Barrier. So this is also a massive damage shield, and it will heal over time. It costs a lot of ultimate, it lasts 30 seconds, and the radius is 12. A reason to run this on your front bar over the other two is once you get this this maxed out in PvP, you can get 10% magic recovery when you're slotting on your front bar, making it very useful. Now we're going to go to a back bar working left to right. I recommend Ice Staff predominantly, Lightning's okay, and Fire is okay. Couple reasons you're going to run Destruction Staff. Equipping an Ice Staff reduces the cost of blocking, which is nice to block mitigation. Focus will give us a damage shield that scales off of max health, and you also have a better chance of applying status effects. So the Elemental Blockade skill here, when you use Frost, snares and reduces armor against chilled enemies and grants damage shields. So you want to put that down for that reason and use a Destruction Staff on your back bar for that exact reason. And then I have a stamina-based heal over time. This is not really high on the tooltip, Echoing Vigor, but what it does is you can stack it with other Echoing Vigors. So if a bunch of people are running this like DPS or another healer or tank, you're going to have a lot of healing per second coming in with all this stacking healing. A lot of PvP ball groups use this skill and it's useful. You have a lot of stamina cost with it, but the duration is pretty long and you don't have to babysit it. We're using a proc set called Powerful Assault, so regardless of what set and where you place it, if you're doing a front bar or you're doing a back bar, you need to have Echoing Vigor match that bar space. We'll get to that in the trial section a little bit later, but for the dungeons, we put it on our back bar. We're going to use an Undaunted skill on our 3 key, that's Energy Orb. This is simply resource sustain rich. It's also going to give burst heal around when people pop that explosion, and it's really good heal over time in your group. It's going to last 10 seconds, 8-meter radius, but really every 20 seconds people can pop this synergy, and you want synergies flowing in your group, predominantly because of the Undaunted command. Activating a synergy restores 4% of your max health, stamina, and magic. So the more synergies your group has, whether you're in a dungeon or a trial, the better, because you'll have a lot of passive sustain coming in with Undaunted command. Absolute God tier skill up is number 2, and that's Zena's Empowering Disc. It's going to give you the minor Fortitude, Intellect, and Endurance, but the real big one here is Minor Courage. Typically, tanks run a 5-piece set to provide this buff to everybody, 215 weapon and spell damage, but you can provide it to the group as long as you're maintaining high uptime with it. The trick of this skill is the radius is 8 meters, and with this morph you can step in and out. The reason I take this morph is it's a lot more forgiving, you have a lot higher uptime with Minor Courage, and the healing per second with the other morph just isn't worth it when people can step in and out. So PvE DPS need to be aware, when you put this down, you don't have to stand in it all the time, but you need to tiptoe in and out of it when the situation dictates, for Minor Courage at least. And then you have a flex spot on your back bar. Rune Guard of Freedom is nice. It's going to basically give everyone Minor Resolve, which is somewhat redundant with Combat Prayer, but it's a lot easier to maintain this because it's 20 seconds. It goes to everybody. You also get Minor Protection, and if you drop really low, you're going to get a burst heal and a bit of armor. The other morph's going to give you a little bit of CC, but I love Rune Guard of Freedom just for an oh crap, I'm about to die, boom, pop up and keep the fight going. Another great alternative is Rune of Colorless Pool. So this is going to give minor vulnerability and minor brittle to your group. I typically run this skill in my number 1 key if I don't have an Arcanist tank or another Arcanist running this. Especially in trials, it's critical because those 2 buffs together are going to add a lot of damage to your group. And that's pretty much what you want to do as a healer. Your goal isn't necessarily to heal as much as possible, it's to keep everyone alive and then provide as much damage amps and damage reduction as possible, so the fights are so much easier for your tanks and DPS, along with resource sustain. It's critical. So you have to kind of rewire your brain for healing in ESO. A lot of buffs, a lot of debuffs equals a lot easier fights when everyone's DPS is skyrocketing. Another alternative to the number 1 key in my back bar is Overflowing Altar. This is usually provided by someone in your group, especially in trials. So if no one's running that and you might have another Arcanist, feel free to flex this out, but really your group should be running this, especially in a trial. So for the back bar ultimate on the dungeon setup, we're going to go with Aggressive Warhorn, increases max magic and max stamina, and gives your allies major force. Typically you and or the tank are going to cycle this buff. So now back to the trials setup. So what we're going to do for trials is exact same thing. We're going to run Resto on our front. We're going to run the 3 common restoration staff abilities: Combat Prayer, Radiant Regeneration, and Illustrious Healing. We're also going to continue to have the Chakram of Dynasty on our front bar in the 4 key, using it to spam shields and build Cruxes. And then you'll have Echoing Vigor on your front. And the reason why is the gear sets that I'm going to choose to use. Powerful Assault is going to be on my restoration staff bar, so I need some type of assault ability to cast to keep that up. If you're running in the trials, remember that Powerful Assault's not going to go to everybody, so you can cast it over and over to make sure that everyone has it active. This is huge priority in trials, is making sure you have high uptime on your DPS, something you have to work towards and do. Also, feel free to flex an ability if you need a little bit more healing and everyone stacked tight on really hard high damage fights. Curative Surge is a good option. You can get rid of a Restoration Staff ability or something else you're not using on your front bar. This is a little bit niche, really hard to aim, but it has a sane healing potential if you need it for very specific fights. The ultimate that I flex in for Trials is Gibbering Shelter, so we're going to use this for basically a damage shield. The reason why is a lot of those mechanics will require a damage shield, and it's nice to have on your front bar. And then you can go with the other alternatives that I already mentioned on the front bar, Reviving Barrier for a nice little shield, and it has a good resource sustain, or Glyphic of the Tides for 15 meters heal over time and major protection, which is also useful. We go to the back bar and it's going to look very similar. So we're going to work left to right. We're going to go Rune of the Colorless Pool. So this is going to give minor vulnerability, minor brittle. Remember, if a tank's running this, it might be a flex option for you. Same thing with Rune Guard of Freedom, going to give minor resolve to everybody and make you extraordinarily tanky. And then we're going to have the Undaunted skill, Energy Orb, and that 3-key still. So consider those two first abilities I mentioned. Overflowing Altar is a great alternative to both of those. And then we're going to have Zena's Empowering Disc on our back bar, along with Blockade, Destruction Staff, Ice Staff on our back bar. The ultimate of choice is going to be Aggressive Warhorn. We're going to be running Pillagers, which I'll get to in the gear on the trial setup. And that's going to give us a lot of increased damage because your max magic, max stamina increases for everybody, and your group gets Major Force every 30 seconds, or if you have them back to back, you can do it every 10 seconds to take advantage of Major Force. It's important to coordinate with your tanks and healers and making sure that Major Force buff is active as long as possible. There are some sets that can take advantage of Major Force, so usually your raid leader will call this out and trying to take advantage of that Major Force at all times if possible. All right, so that's how you basically set up your bar, whether you're using Dungeon or Trials. I highly recommend using the Dungeon setup first as you get used to it. The burst healing is a bit easier to get used to, and then switch to the Trials setup depending if you have the gear, and you don't necessarily need a burst heal, you just need a lot of buffs and debuffs. Okay, so we're going to show you the rotation here in game. So usually there's a pre-combat phase. So before a pull happens, a light attack and so forth, you really need to buff everybody up. Ideally, your group needs to play, well, like a group. Kind of like a diamond formation, if you will, or somewhat like a triangle. You're going to have the tank right here, turning the back so people can take advantage of the backstat or CP passive. You're going to have the DPS either in one group or two, left and right, and then you're going to have the healer kind of in the back, somewhat like a diamond. The reason why is your heal over time, you really want everyone to get access to all the buffs if possible. When people are scattered out left, right, and center, you need to tighten them up as long as the mechanic dictates. Otherwise, they're just not going to get the buffs, they're not going to get the healing. You'll see the more coordinated groups almost pixel stack on top of each other and stand really, really close. If there's two healers, then you can obviously spread out the healing and so forth. But just position yourself so you can hit the most people as possible and ultimately prioritize the tank survivability over everybody else's. So typically how I do this is I start my pre-buff rotation on my front. So I'll place this illustrious healing here. I'll combat prayer everyone, get everyone buffed up. I'll go to my back bar, I'll go Rune Guard, I'll do this, I'll throw out an orb. And then once combat starts, then I'll just usually hit a couple powerful assaults to get that proc. Once combat starts, you kind of rotate in and then you put your blockade down. And a lot of it's just buff management at this point. So you come to your front bar, what do I have active? What do I need to use? So I'm going to go 1, 2, put this down. I'm going to throw out these shields to build a Crux, take advantage of a passive. Then I'm coming back. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do Echoing Vigor twice. I'm going to trial. Go back to my front, and you can see your rotation is almost similar to a DPS. It takes a lot of time. You're in a panic mode, you can drop this ulti and then just heal it up. You'll see it heal up to full, 1, 2, and then it's just gonna do massive healing in the area. But really, you're going back and forth constantly and doing heals, and you don't have a whole lot of time to not just be using global cooldowns, because that's how many heals you have. Your number one priority typically is having illustrious healing around the group, because you want the healing over time to basically passively do a lot of the work. Radiant Regeneration has to be cast quite a bit. Use it predominantly in the pre-buff phase and when you have a global cooldown available. Combat Prayer, very, very important for minor Berserk. When you go to your back bar, the most important for everyone's DPS is Echoing Vigor, casting this at least twice when you're in a trial. And then Energy Orb. Keep that Energy Orb flowing every 10 seconds if you can, because people will be able to proc it and resource sustain. This one's a no-brainer here, the Zen's Empowering Disc. You got to watch your positioning. The one you can let fall off typically is Rune Guard of Freedom if you have Combat Prayer rolling. And then Blockade is very, very important to proc those status effects. So it's a lot of priorities. When in doubt, keep people alive, and then focus on Echoing Vigor on your back bar and Blockade. When in doubt on your front bar, focus on Combat Prayer and Illustrious Healing to do most of the work. Use the Chakrams to build ultimates, and then your Crux Evolving Rune Men to get a nice burst heal. So for the Trials rotation, it's actually quite similar. The difference here is Echoing Vigor's on your front bar, so you're going to need to cast that along with the other heals. You have the Chakram ability here as well. And then on your back bar, you just have Rune of Colorless Pool you're going to have to cast in 15-meter range. That's only going to be there if the tank's not providing for someone else. And then you have the same sort of thing. Energy Orb every 10 seconds, 20 seconds here. Blockade, you're going to switch to your front. Illustrious, Combat Prayer, and then 1, 2 Echoing Vigors. Make sure everyone get Powerful Assault. Use your shield when you're in trouble if you need it, or go in your back bar and using that aggressive Warhorn. I've thrown a lot at you. Let's do a little bit more. I'm going to go over the gear. Now, I'm not going to list 1,000 gazillion alternative sets because the hero gear is incredibly complex. So what I'm going to do is give you the loadout that I recommend predominantly. Link in the description below. Come to my website, check out all the secondary options and what you can use. I'm going to give you one Trials one dungeon that these actually work and what the big dogs are running. Am I a big dog? All right, moving on. Let's talk about the gear. All right, so for gear, we're going to run the Monster Helm Azana's, the Inferno. Sure, I pronounced that wrong, but it's absolutely god tier for survivability. Overhealing yourself or an ally grants 4,272 armor for 1.1 seconds and minor vitality. This will dramatically increase your survivability for your group. Highly recommend this in a Trials group setup. You can swap this out for a lot of alternatives, but start with survivability first. Now, we're going to run Powerful Assault, like I said, for the Trials setup on our front bar. So we're going to run a Resto Staff. You're going to run 2 rings and then 1 piece on your body. So it's only active on the front bar using Echoing Vigor a couple times because it can only go to 5 group members. That's going to give you a unique buff, 307 weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds, so it's pretty easy to maintain this. On the back bar, we're going to run Perfected Pillager's Prophet. So casting an ultimate ability while in combat grants 5% ultimate spec up to a max of 20 as ultimate to up to 11 other group members within 12 meters every 2 seconds over 10 seconds. This is essentially going to be a way to feed your DPS tons of ultimate. Currently, there might be a bug with this where it goes to pets. A lot of end-game PvEers doing hard content are running a lot of Dragonites and Necros and Arcanists, so that's usually not an issue. So there are some alternatives to use from this set, but ultimate means more damage for you and your group, so pop an aggressive Warhorn on your back. Speaking of ultimate, we're actually going to run a Mythic. Pearl of Elphony, I'm sure I screwed that up. When you attempt to use resources to cast a healing ability while in combat, and your dominant resource is under 50%, gain 3 ultimate. So you have to be kind of cognizant with this Mythic of kind of tanking your resources and constantly below 50%. That shouldn't be very hard with us with the Arcanist. You're actually going to use a couple of heavy, 1 medium, and then 4 light with this setup. It'll tank your resources just below that threshold, so you're constantly getting ultimate back with this. You're also going to run a decisive front bar resto to continue to proc ultimate, and then feed Perfected Pillager's Prophet to your group for huge ultimate, which means huge damage for everybody. That leaves 1 piece that you can go with Armor of the Trainee just for a little bit more max health, and you also can go with Druids if you have a craftable solution for Armor of the Trainee. And we take a look at the gear chart here, and this is what it looks like. Kind of goofy, but 2 heavy, 1 medium, 4 light. You're going to be super survivable using a couple of prismatic enchants on your big heavy spots, and then decisive for ultimate generation with infuse for reduced spell cost, magic recovery to make up for that missing light armor. Meant for super tanky hardcore trials. Next up, we're going to go with the dungeon setup, and this is what I recommend. A little bit lighter, a little bit harder to pull off, but if you want massive nukes in a short window to do hard mode trials and you want to bring a healer along, this is a good option. So what you're going to do is run Master's Architect on your back bar. Master's Architect allows you to basically save up ultimate, and then when you cast ultimate, you get Major Slayer, which is going to increase damage done in dungeons or any PvE content by 10%. So if you have a 500 ultimate saved up and you pop this for a boss fight, it will drop in seconds because your group DPS will be through the roof. You're going to run Spell Power Cure on this, assuming your tank isn't running Olimire. That's going to give you and your group major courage, so that's going to be a lot more increased damage. And then you're also going to run Spalder of Ruin. You're going to have to crouch to activate this. This will also increase damage uniquely by 260 weapon and spell damage. So you're going to be providing 260 weapon and spell damage. You're going to get major courage, 430 weapon and spell damage, and you're going to provide Master's Architect Major Slayer. The group damage in a very short, tight window is what it's optimized for. That way you can skip a lot of mechanics along with the tank running other sets that complement this as well. You're going to run the Master's Perfected Grand Rejuvenation Resto Staff on your front, and then a one-piece Magma Incarnate for resource sustain. You can go 6 light, 1 heavy with this, so you're not going to have as high of a resource pool, but for dungeons, those fights will be really, really quick if you're running this. So let's jump in and show you what the miscellaneouses are. So I go 64 magic, obviously. You're going to have a lot higher stats than I do and when you're running the trial specific set. So I have the dungeon set on right now, so the stats unbuffed look pretty weak, but if you're fully optimized, it will look a lot different. So max magic is what I recommend. I go with the Thief Mundastone, couple options: Ritual for better healing, Atronach for better resource sustain. Remember, trials, you want to be just below 50% if possible. Since we don't have our spell power or weapon damage and spell damage buff, you can run Essence of Spell Power. This will help you out with major sorcery and major prophecy. And if you really want to get sweaty, you can actually run Heroism potions if you don't want to use those buffs or you don't need them. Minor Heroism, giving ultimate, feeding your pillagers profit. Your DPS can also run this as well. So pillagers, minor heroism potions, people are just popping ultimate, and one of the reasons they get such high damage. More of a sweaty setup there. So for food, you can run Long Fin Pasty for a blend of max stats depending on how your resource sustain is. Remember, in trials, you want to be sub 50 but almost never run out. Dungeons, it really doesn't matter. You can have good recovery, but you need a lot of health, a lot of stamina to dodge, break free, and cast Echoing Vigor. Ghastly is the best resource sustain, but it doesn't have any HP with it, and you can be on the struggle bus dying quite a bit. A cheaper alternative is Witchmother's Potent Brew, which gives you magic and health and a bit of recovery. So your health's not going to be that high, your recovery is not going to be that high, but it's pretty much the best of both worlds. So for racial choice, I actually use the Khajiit for all this footage. I wouldn't recommend the Khajiit for a racial pick for a healer. I'd go with Breton #1 or Argonian #2. I think Breton is probably the strongest for PvE healing, but the Argonian is a great option, very sturdy and very good in PvP if you plan on doing that. So for champion points in the blue tree, this is a dynamic CP add-on, very helpful. I go with Rejuvenator, Swift Renewal, Soothing Tide. And then down here, I go with Enlivening Overflow. A couple things you want to be aware of. This preparation passive is very useful, so make sure you have it for a 10% damage reduction at all times. Going over the red tree, you have a bunch of different options. So Set and Forget Easy is Boundless Vitality, Fortified, or Rejuvenation. That leaves 2 slots that you can go with. So Bastion is really good for massive damage shields if you're using Barrier, you're using that other shield. Great setup here. Another good one is Spirit Master. Decreases the time it takes to resurrect an ally by 33%. You don't have a temp bar with this that has a res passive. This is also a really, really good one. So when in doubt, you could take these 3 and then just go with one of these. I like less recovery if I'm doing the trials, so I tank my resources, and Spirit Master and Bastion if I'm doing something really, really hard. Well, gang, that's a video. Hope you got something out of this PvE healer. One of my favorites still. I still love healing with the temp bar, but man, it's fun using the Arcanist. It's new. Got some crazy wild buffs and debuffs. You can really feel the damage and increase healing both in dungeons and trials. Highly recommend picking it up. Try my build, check the website for the actual gear setup, and then a bunch of alternatives if you don't have that gear. I have tons of options for you. I'll keep this build up and some other ones, so if you like this video, like, subscribe, leave me a comment, and also check me out at twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming. My mom claims I'm the best streamer alive. Appreciate you.